Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to episode 9 of Brand Studio Live. I'm Rameet Arora. I have a brand new set of brand masters with me today. Hosted jointly by HT Brand Studio and DMA Asia, Brand Studio Live brings together the country's top CXOs and we talk about the hottest topics in marketing. In the process, we not only end up learning from the best, but more often than not, being inspired by them. Episode 9 is our second episode in the Mumbai chapter of Brand Studio Live, and we've moved out to the HT newsroom to the haloed grounds of BSC, erstwhile the Bombay Stock Exchange, and this is where God knows how many brands and companies have actually paved their futures and their fortunes. So a big thank you to BSC for hosting us today. Without further delay, let's get started with today's episode. As marketeers, we're all sort of in it to win it, and win it, the it can easily be defined as customer loyalty, and that's the Holy Grail. We're all trying to ensure that customers keep coming back to us, regardless of the alternatives. Brands need to go a step further and establish a deeper, more emotional connection with customers, which is quite contrary to what lots of brands are trying to do, which is just get more and more and more people in, and the internet makes that possible. The road to that connection, in my view, is paved by personal relevance. But I'd like to hear more from our brand custodians. Maybe they agree, maybe they don't. A great set of brand masters, and we're going to start with our first. My first guest is Sagar Boke, Head of Marketing and Business Head of Spices at Tata Chemicals. Sagar is a business leader whose core experience lies in FMCG sales and marketing. He has worked across categories and geographies. He enjoys challenges that involve setting up businesses or turning them around. It's fantastic to have you, Sagar. Sagar, you've dealt with categories that are by definition low involvement.
That's right.
Very important in our lives, but low involvement. Yeah. And now we're talking about affinity, and we're talking about loyalty.
Yeah.
More than ever, the need to build affinity around some of these categories is on your shoulders now.
That's right.
Talk to us a little bit about that. Categories like salt.
Yeah.
How do you build customer affinity, and how does the new digital world sort of impact everything that you're doing and your challenges which have existed for a long time now?
So thank you, Rameet, for having me here. As you rightly said, I think because of digital, what is happening is that there's a plethora of choice, right? And because of plethora of choice, the loyalties have become very fickle. And it's always a challenge for any marketer to ensure that how do you get a customer that you acquire, because it takes a lot to acquire a customer, but I think it takes more to really retain the customer. And when we are talking about some categories where the affinity and loyalties are high, and there are some categories where affinity and loyalty are low because of the nature of the category. So now obviously the categories that we handle, so essentially which are the food category like salt, spices, pulses. Now the involvement level in many of those categories, we say that they tend to be low. And the imperative really in the digital environment is to ensure that how do we really create affinity so that consumers buy you again and again. So the starting point for us is that there are no low involvement categories. I think there are, it's really upon marketers to really figure out what role it can play in the consumer's life. So I would like to talk through about what we do at Tata Salt, and many of the things possibly would go against the conventional wisdom of how consumers would, how marketers would want to view a category like this. So there are two insights in salt. The first insight, and they are very universal insights. The first insight is that a salt is a salt is a salt. No one wants to care about a salt. And second insight is that salt is bad for health. Now on one end, people are apathetic about your category. On the other end, people feel that it's bad for your health. Now how do you really work in a category like that and build affinity? And we have taken this journey for last four years or so, and I would like to talk you through about some of the things which I think has helped us significantly. The first thing I think is really you have to be very genuine in terms of what role does your brand play in the consumers' lives. I will give a case study about the recent campaign that we did on Tata Salt, which was called as Missing Eye. So the whole thing about the genesis of Tata Salt has been that in 1983, the government wanted that in the iodine deficiency in the country we find a solution to cater to the iodine deficiency, the single biggest micronutrient deficiency, and that is how Tata Salt was born. Over a period of time, the iodine conversation took a backstage. In fact, there are a lot of negative conversations. So, World Iodine Deficiency Day, which falls on 21st October, digitally and also in other media platform, we removed I from all the headlines. That created a lot of curiosity as to why the I is missing. Like say, in India, you are having NDA, right? There are a lot of curiosity as to why this is happening, and the reveal was that the missing I is the iodine, and iodine is the I that India needs. The amount of conversation and the sentiments that we got on that campaign was humongous. So, we use digital as a media because I think it's very conversational. People want to talk about, people really want to share this particular thing. Also, digital in a way is also leading while digital consumer may not be interacting with categories like FMCG on digital from the purchase point of view, but a lot of opinions are getting formed on digital. So essentially, Tata Salt continues to be one of the most talked about brands when it comes to foods per se on internet, and the sentiments. So typically, we always have more than 95% positive sentiment. So this missing eye campaign that I was talking about. 2 years back, we had launched our iron fortified salt, where essentially the premise also was that India, after iodine, iron is the second most prevalent deficiency, and the strata of society which gets most affected is expecting mothers. The iron deficiency is the highest among them. So we had created a content campaign called as Iron Women of India, wherein we spoke about women who coming from very humble backgrounds. Someone at 55 years scaled Mount Everest. Someone who came from a very low background and became a pilot. And how these iron women are shaping the country of tomorrow, and what role does a brand can play in their lives. So, I think if you are picking a conversation thread which is relevant and which links back to the product promise that I think people want to talk about you. That's first learning. Second learning is that while you want to create conversation on digital, you also have to know that it has to be relevant. You cannot just be I interact with a lot of brand custodians, and there's a lot of pressure to really create brand love, but if it's not coming from a genuine premise, it doesn't work. And we see a lot of such campaigns backfiring because either there is no authentic social truth which is underlying with the campaign that you're talking about, or there is no product fit really. I mean, why would a brand want to do versus why not the other brand would have wanted to do. So second leg that we really work on Tata Salt is that our positioning Desh ki sehat, Desh ka namak. So what Desh ka namak means is what are the prevalent narratives in the country that we can ride upon. If you are really echoing those narratives, I think that's when I think that is when the real conversations start happening.
Because that's two very fantastic points, and they're sharp. I'd like to get some reactions or some questions from the group now. Rajiv, you want to talk to us? Can somebody give him a mic, please? Yeah.
So when you're talking about taking a little bit of an angle, right? You talked about the iodine campaign where you dropped out the eye. How do you figure out whether this is resonating, especially in the early stages before the momentum builds, especially online? And how does that measurement of it progress for you?
Well, I'll be very honest. I think before you are starting the campaign, I don't know that something is going to become a big hit or something is not going to become a big hit, right? So some campaigns are surprised us by the amount of momentum that they have picked, and some campaigns are also, I won't say disappointed, but we thought that they would do well. So it happens both ways, really. One of the things that we really look at is that is it authentic? Does it really going to, because the first criteria that I do not want it to impact my brand negatively for sure. If it impacts positively, I would be happy. But if it's going to impact something negatively, I am not going to do that. Second thing is that, is there a genuine insight? I don't want just I mean, one of the things that we always look at it, we don't want to do it just for the sake of making people, feel happy about it or trying to get into conversation. So I think the whole first starting point is that we do not want to look at something which is not going to impact the brand negatively for sure. And I would say we have been successful on that 100% of the time. Now coming to your question on the measurement, I think the brand love is like your emotional bank balance. That means when the time of crisis, you will be the brand which will always be forgiven. And we see that all the time happening. So social media, as I said, it has happened a couple of times. There were a lot of negative things about salt that, and other people spoke about Tata salt hence being bad for health. Then there was some conversation about why you charge more in Northeast as compared to this part, rest of the part of the country. And you'd be surprised to know that the netizens themselves actually started trolling the people who were saying negative things about us. And why does that happen? I think that happens because you have created that balance, the emotional balance in the consumer's mind, that as a brand, this is not a brand which is going to do something wrong, or this is not a brand which is going to do something which is going to impact the consumers negatively.
So you're basically saying it's about authenticity, being true to what your brand is, the fit with it, and then that translating into brand love over time.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
We can take one more question. Yeah.
You spoke about in all your campaigns India and nation, and whichever I've been also seeing, it's always been about India, nation. So is it only going to be there for coming years also? It will be always about India for your salt, or you also tried some other campaigns which have not worked for you?
Well, I would say that, so the way we look at the marketing strategy at Tata Salt, so the positioning is Desh ki sehat, Desh ka namak. So let me bifurcate this into two. Desh ki sehat essentially speaks about what the product does to the health of the nation. So if you say we have iodine, I mean, we are India's first iodized salt. Then we had iron fortified salt. We have a low sodium salt. We have a Himalayan rock salt. So all these salts essentially are enabling health in some ways, right? And all our product campaigns essentially talk about why they are better. In fact, the recent campaign that we had on Tata Salt, which was called a Sawal Kijiye Apne Namak Se, wherein we actually showed the proof as to why Tata Salt is better. And there were a series of such campaigns. So wherein we are essentially talking about functionally why I am better. Right, that's the first task. How do I get conversion from other brands to Tata Salt? Second piece on that we work on Tata Salt is the brand love piece that we spoke about. Third thing, how do I thought leadership? Because salt as a category, SOS, salt, oil, and sugar are bad for health, right? While it's not completely true, it's not completely false, not completely true. There is always a thing, right? Say for example, if you're talking about salt, if you are in a tropical country like ours, wherein you don't wear an AC environment, you secrete salt. You need salt hence. You don't eat as much outside as the Western countries do, right? And hence we do not eat processed food. So the salt you are consuming in, say, home food is not bad, right? So how do we really educate consumers about that? The second piece that we always work on. And the third piece that we work on. And the fourth piece is how do we upgrade the consumers continuously. Like if we are built a strong franchise of Tata Salt, now how do I make that consumer move to a low sodium salt, because it appeals to certain section of the audience, and how do I augment that usage with, say, rock salt? And I think that's so all these four pieces we always try and balance out, because I think as a brand you cannot build on one pillar which is only building emotional connect or only building the functional relevance.
Excellent. That's a great start to the episode, because you've given us lots of food for thought.
Thank you.
And lots for everybody else to come back and sort of take off from. Thank you so much. That was lovely.
Thank you, Rameet. Pleasure.
Yes. My next guest is Subhrangshu Neogi, Chief Commercial Officer, UPES, previously Director and Head of Group Marketing and Brand at Religare. Subhrangshu brings with him 23 years of experience across sectors such as financial services, FMCG, retail, telecom and media. He's built multiple businesses from scratch, and he's passionate about technology-driven and emerging businesses and startups. Welcome, Subhrangshu.
Thanks, Rameet. Great to be here.
Subhrangshu, we've for many years now, we've had conversations on marketing and brands, and we've been at it. So let's go to the old world, from the old world to the new world. Let's just do this old new mix. Everybody talks about the 4 Ps, and everybody has an interpretation on the 4 Ps. In today's day and age, tell us about your 4Ps.
No, so I think let's just step back a little. I think, what we spoke about, and as the topic says, it's a cluttered place out there. I mean, increasingly more and more brands are going online. It's not just online brands, but it's also offline brands going online, right? And given that, I think there are too many brands out there and all fighting for the mind space of the consumer, all fighting for attention. And I think fundamentally the other premise that we need to look at is that online and digital as a medium, at the heart of it, or at times people think that it's just performance, and people tend to forget that there is something called brand which you need to focus on. So the way I see it, and the way, as we spoke about, I think you need to really look at the 4Ps or the 4 pillars to kind of get this right. And it's a synchronization of the brand philosophy, the brand purpose, the people who embody the brand and carry the brand on their shoulders, and the processes. So any brand,
philosophy, people, purpose, and processes.
that's right. That's right. And I think the other thing which we need to be cognizant of is that no brand is purely online and can afford to be purely online, and no brand is purely offline. So this hybrid, if you may, is really the order of the day. Any brand which is fundamentally online will have to be offline. Any brand which is fundamentally offline will have to be online necessarily. So I think till the time these 4Ps collectively do not work in harmony and in tandem to kind of really create a sort of a well-oiled machinery and a well-orchestrated machinery, the consumer experience is not going to be what you would want it to be, and you cannot really engage with consumers because, as I was telling you the other day, the age of marketing and selling as we knew it is gone. It's about conversations, it's about engaging, it's about creating experiences, and a sum total of all your experiences is the brand. It's not about creativity. So it's about the people who represent the brand, the people who carry the brand on their shoulders. It's about the processes which you kind of encounter when you interact with the brand, be it really the online application form for a particular category that I'm currently working in, or when you visit a branch of a conventional business, or even for that matter the brand philosophy. What is it that you stand for? What conversation are you having? What content do you stand for? All those things, and more importantly, the larger purpose that you exist for, which is the brand purpose. I mean, when all these 4 things come together and they kind of, work together in tandem, that's when true, brand experiences are created.
I'm going to pick one of your Ps, and
Sure.
that's purpose. More and more research says that millennials and Gen Z, or whatever the new generations could be called, is driven in part by purpose more than ever before.
Yeah.
They're concerned about the world.
Yeah.
They're concerned about what's happening.
Yeah.
They're far more sensitive to changes. Talk to us a little bit about, from your experience, about evangelizing purpose, particularly for this new generation of purpose-seeking audiences.
Look, I think it's not as complicated as we think it is, right? Because ultimately you need to kind of not just push your agenda, to put it very crudely. It's about what the consumers want. It's about them. It's not about us, right? So the moment you kind of start looking at the scenario from their point of view and not ours as marketers, I think that's where half the battle is won. And you need to really find that purpose, what you exist for, and build a narrative around that. If the brand narrative is around the consumer and what the consumer really cares for. So for instance, if I'm an education brand, and if I am saying that, come and study with me, it doesn't really appeal to them. But if I say that, look, here is an opportunity for you to become really truly specialized and become somebody who can actually potentially work in an industry, and you're ready for the industry, and you're more relevant for the industry, and here's an opportunity for you to kind of really study with me and shape the future. That's again, from the context of the prospect and the consumer. So if you can build a narrative which focuses around that and focus on a larger purpose, that why you exist, yeah.
Do we have some reactions or some questions from the group at this point?
So one of the things that the edutech sector is trying to do is to differentiate themselves. But I think a lot of them end up saying the same story. So to a student, he really doesn't know what is that particular parameter or what is that particular incident that he would want to get differentiated with, and that is the reason that he would want to be a part of that brand. So how do you really solve for this problem?
So I think it's very simple. I mean, people, you're right, and people tend to talk about parameters like infrastructure and so on and so forth. But ultimately, it's about the future. I mean, if you were to look at 2 or 3 decisions that people take, one of them is really about a higher education choice, and I think that's the space that we exist as a brand. And I think it's very important to tell people that look, this is how your future is going to be shaped if you were to be with me. This is how the future would look like, and you're basically talking about the future. If without selling the future, you can talk about the future and you can talk about future outcomes, that's what people really care about, and that's where true differentiation, comes into play.
Thank you.
Ajay, you had a question.
This is a little unfair, but it's a genuine ask for
Sure.
advice, which I think you're most situated and most to give, which is how do you find purpose? We've all heard, Steve Jobs, genius, blah, blah, blah. How does a guy like you or me find purpose?
For the brand?
For the brand.
or
For the brand.
brand?
No, not for yourself, of course. That's another problem. But I'm talking about
Look,
brand purpose.
I think it has to be some amount of inside out thinking. It cannot be outside in. I mean, it is obviously, I mean, you need to kind of marry outside in thinking with inside out, but it's fundamentally inside out. And you have to define your purpose, and you have to see how that purpose resonates with the consumer, right? So it cannot be something esoteric which does not resonate, and at the same time it cannot be something which is relevant but you don't really stand for, that you're not passionate about. So it has to be a mix of both outside in and inside out thinking, and it has to be a larger purpose as to why you exist. It cannot be transactional, and it needs to be enduring. It cannot be for the short term. It's more long term. It's not tactical. It's part of your fabric. It's part of your core existence. It's part of your core essence as a brand. Hope that answers the
It's
question.
why you exist.
Yeah.
Many thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Subhrangshu. That
Thanks.
was wonderful.
Thanks, Rameet. Been a
Thanks a
pleasure,
lot.
as always. Thanks.
Delighted to introduce my next guest, Ajay Rao, partner CRM, Martech and data at the DAN network. Ajay has 32 years of experience in data-driven marketing. We've learned lots from him over the years, analytics and CRM across a variety of industries and countries. Many database marketing programs launched by Ajay have been implemented all over the world in over 65 countries, I'm told. He's won numerous awards, and it's really a pleasure to have you here and to get learning from you today, Ajay. Ajay, my question to you is, everybody on the internet in particular, and my sense is in general in the world, is trying to acquire customers. And it's also become easy to sort of acquire customers. There's very few people talking about retaining customers. And I have a feeling the wheel's taking a full circle, and people are now beginning to realize that retaining customers is probably more rewarding and more sustainable than just acquiring for the sake of acquiring. You've been through this many times in your life, before the internet and now with the internet. Talk to us a little bit about engagement is equal to loyalty is equal to profit, that equation that we all grew up with, and what it means in today's digital internet world.
First, thanks so much for having me.
Yes.
Always a pleasure to see you, my friend.
Wonderful.
Now to your question. I had a boss, now this is well before the days of the internet, a guy called Wunderman, who quite literally wrote the book,
Yes, we all
the many terms which we use today, which originated Wunderman. He used to have quite a pithy saying: acquire with the intent to retain, retain with the intent to profit. Now think about that for a minute, right? When I'm looking at a customer and saying, do I want to acquire this person or not, I should have a filter saying, how likely is this person to remain with me? I should then have a filter saying, if he or she remains with me, how likely is the person to give me a profit? So if I can't see a series of...
Then I should be acquiring the customer.
Absolutely. Now that's something which we tend to forget.
Yes.
And I think this was well before the internet, and that fundamental truth of business has not changed, right? Which you want profitable relationships. Now there are two parts to profit. One part is, of course, the amount of revenue that you make, and the other part is the amount you cost me, right? Now, if you're the kind of guy who always wants a discount, you may give me lots of revenue, but maybe unprofitable revenue. So you may not be as desirable, even though you're great on the revenue side, than somebody who'd buy less, perhaps less frequently, but pay top dollar, right? So when we're thinking about profitability, we're talking about both revenue and the cost side. Now, one of the costs is the cost of acquisition, right? Now, we tend to look at cost of acquisition independently of benefit of retention. So we hear a lot about marketers who say, oh, my CPA was 300 rupees or my CPA was 3 rupees. Really? Does that make a difference? How much money are you going to make out of the guy who cost you 300 bucks as opposed to the guy who cost you 3 rupees? Now, if I'm going to make 3 lakhs out of a 300 buck guy and another 3 rupees out of a 3 rupee guy, you do the math. Which one's preferable? So I think one of the issues that we have now is that all of this is speeded up a lot more with the internet. So what would take us, months to figure out, now you can figure out in minutes, days at most, right? So you have the opportunity to fix it and get the right guys in, keep them for the right reasons, and benefit in the long run.
You work with a lot of marketing partners and brands. Do you feel that sensibility is popular?
You're asking an unfair question, but let's do it this way. Let's ask the marketers in the audience, right, what their metrics as marketers are.
Sure.
Right? I think that would be helpful. So let's do some quick questions around what are your metrics for marketing? Sagar, you want to go first?
Rajiv can go first.
So actually, I agree with your overall framework almost entirely, right? Acquisition, retention, monetization. That's sort of my experience has been building consumer internet products. Sort of that's how we look at a traditional internet funnel. The only tweak I'd make to it is when you're talking about the retention part, there's virality there as well, right? How many consumers does this consumer bring? And I think that was true in the past as well in the non-internet age when we talk about word of mouth. That's much more accelerated in the internet age. So I think otherwise we're looking at the world the same way.
So the reward from a loyal customer is not just money, but it's also more customers because advocacy is.
We're doing the metrics for a client the other day. Fascinating. He spends 500 rupees to get a customer who will stay with him for a month and give him no profit and very little by way of money. But each one of those guys produces 2 more customers who give him 5,000 rupees. Yeah. So it's not valuable for me to get you, but because you get the other 2 guys who are valuable, it's worth bringing you on. It's absolutely fascinating. I mean, seeing the metrics there. And so he's spending a lot of money in getting people who will not stay long. So as a traditionalist, my reaction was, you've got to be cuckoo. And he said, no, to your point.
So Ajay, let me ask you a fundamental question on this equation. Clearly, what you're also suggesting is acquire with the knowledge that the customer is valuable. When you advise brands and when you advise marketers, what's the simplest mechanism to figure out whether a customer is valuable or not? Is it led by data? Is it led by business models? Where do you start from?
So I think I heard a lovely line just a few minutes ago about how McDonald's looks at it. Do you want to just go through that and I'll tell you
more
some
people,
reaction.
more often, more money. Yes.
So more people, more often, more money. So what you're looking at really is the number of people, the frequency, and the spend per instance, right? And what you're seeing is if I get these 3 to line up, I'm in a good place.
Right.
And that's your answer. Yeah.
Does anybody else have a question for Ajay?
I have a question for you, Ajay. I understand that retaining the customer, obviously that's an important part. But the whole value that the customer experience plays, I think that many times because 2 customers equally valuable, whether you are going to retain or not, purely depends on the customer experience. And what are your views on really enhancing the experience and engaging with the customers?
So the 3 questions, right? Question 1 is who's valuable to me. Question 2 is what's valuable to him or her. And question 3, which is the most important, is how do I extract and deliver value, right? So if I don't know what that customer values and why is he giving me so much money? Now, it could be, now again, I'm going to go back to Wunderman. I'm feeling very sentimental for Wunderman today because I was just talking about him before this session. So, and he's a great man. He passed away just a few months ago, but a tremendous man. He had, as a boy, a delivery service where he would deliver groceries to these households. One set of households was on Park Avenue, which is where the wealthiest of the wealthiest would live. And, he'd get a nickel or a dime. Another set of households was, for example, an old lady on the 7th floor of a walk-up building no lift. You walk up 7 floors, right? And she'd give him $1. And he'd say, look, I mean, all those rich people just give me a nickel or a dime, and you always give me $1. And why is that? And she said, because I need you more. Now, what you need to figure out is, if you were not there, how devastated would that customer be? Right? So one of the most interesting questions I find to ask is, if brand X went away, how would it change your life? And if people say, oh, I don't care, I've got brand Y, you got a problem. If the guy says, oh, I'd be devastated, I don't know what I'd do without brand X, right? And as a little example here, I mean, we could use Soulflower as an example. Most people who buy from Amit are devastated if it's not going to be available anymore.
So, it's amazing. You brought lots of insight and lots of learning to us. Thank you so much, Ajay.
Thank you for having me.
It's been fantastic having you on this.
As always.
Thank you. My next guest is Piyush Bhargava, Chief Marketing Officer, Nightingales Home Health Services. An alumnus of IIM Bangalore and J. Krishnamurthy Foundation, Piyush is a founder member of homeshop18.com and quicker.com. Previously, he was VP Marketing at Reliance Retail and VP Digital at agio.com. Piyush, welcome.
Thank you so
Wonderful
much,
to
Amit.
have you here and
Thank
all
you.
your experience and everything we can learn. Home healthcare is a sector that's rapidly growing, and rising healthcare costs, lack of medical infrastructure, lots of reasons. You're clearly building a brand with purpose, and you're building what I call a role model brand, which gets talked about as a community role model. Tell us a little more about that. Tell us how you go about building affinity, even though that comes very naturally with the category, and what it takes to build a community brand which stands out.
Okay, so in healthcare, what's very, very important is the clinical protocols and the processes that you follow, right, to treat patients at home. So one of the things that we stand for is we deliver results, we deliver outcomes when we go to a patient's home. Now, unlike other businesses, this is a low volume, high value business, right? So what we essentially tend to do, and where we have most cohorts and LTVs are when we get referrals. So the role of a chief marketing officer is more like a chief experience officer, because at the end of the day, you know, it's a high involvement category. So while you can generate leads online, but you cannot translate them into actually people buying your services and or products. So one of the things that we have been extremely careful about is how do we focus more on something called customer satisfaction and NPS, because if you have a great NPS, you need not try and acquire patients. The existing patients actually refer, and it's a huge population that we are looking at. Just to give you some numbers, I mean, today the home health industry is about 3 billion, which will be close to $6.5 billion by 2020 in 4 years, right? Most of the guys here are highly unorganized players, so their compliance costs are low, you know, they run bureaus and do all of that. But what we are trying to do is essentially build a very high quality organized business which is reliable and trustworthy, right? So the role definitely has, you know, changed to more of a chief experience officer, and the referral program, or you know, the consumer who talk about us, is how we are actually able to see growth. So that's and essentially the purpose behind all this is to ensure that today at people's home we provide the best quality and the best outcomes possible.
It's fantastic. And in doing so, clearly there is also a need to tell a story. You're clearly building a new concept, a new idea. Uh, Tell us a little bit about how you've taken the idea out to people, because it isn't something we think of just automatically.
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a case study on something that is called speech therapy, you know, where we get small kids who are not able to speak properly in an environment where we collect all of them, or we tend to, you know, do it in a place where all of them are there. For example, a children's home, right? So what we essentially do is we give them, we give them treatment on how they can improve in an environment which they like, you know, because there are certain set of people together who have, you know, who are differently abled, and basically the whole idea is to get them to a level where they are, you know, socially accepted and they have no problems going forward. So what we have actually done with a lot of these kids, which is mostly, and our two large markets are Bangalore and Hyderabad, we have been able to get together into something called a physiotherapy center that we operate, right? Which is essentially a place where we can get all of these guys together and give them that treatment. And we have seen huge successes. And when we actually went back, and you can see there are a lot of videos on our site as well, when we have gone back to their parents, they have been like thrilled. I mean, it's gone beyond imagination that something of this sort really got treated, and they are very, very happy about it. And that word of mouth has actually given us very high quality NPSs. So this is something that we have been doing, and not only for this, but for other services also, that are now catching up. For example, rehabilitation at home is a very big service. Nursing at home is a very big service. One of the things that we are the only ones who have come back is doctor visits at home. Right, when you actually get a doctor, irrespective of the cost that you pay, you're thrilled, right? Because you really don't have to travel to a clinic or an hospital. So we're trying to change the game by giving what the consumer needs.
Wonderful. Do we have questions? I mean, this is very fascinating. Yes, please.
So we were talking earlier about purpose, and what is your purpose as Nightingales? Do you have one thought through, or?
No, so we are trying to, so we are a very young company. I mean, it's just about 3.5, 4 years old. And what we are trying to figure out is, there are certain things that we stand for, right? Which is quality, which is following clinical protocols, which are clearly measured, right, in terms of outcomes to the patient. But we are also trying to learn from our patients what are the newer things that they would want, because if you look at the growth of lifestyle diseases, it has grown manifold, right? So 20% of lifestyle diseases across the world are actually from India. I mean 20%, and we have just 6% of doctors and or physicians actually treating it. So as we are progressing, we are learning, right? And the whole purpose for us is to ensure that wherever we provide service, or whenever we go to a patient's home, at the end of the treatment or at the end of the cycle, he really comes out of the problem that he has. So that's what we are trying to solve for. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Piyush. That was really lovely.
It's a pleasure.
Fascinating work.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
My next guest is Amit Sarda, Managing Director, Soulflower. At a time when natural soaps and oil blends were being increasingly considered as upper class indulgences, Amit launched Soulflower brand and made it a household name. Amit, who started the apparel brand Rough and Tough at the age of 16, is that right?
Yeah.
Also holds the unique distinction of being one of the youngest CEOs of a BSE listed company. Yes. Fantastic that we are at BSE today. Yes. And, we're on, actually, I'd like to tell you, where we're sitting now is where the pillars used to be for manual trading.
Yes.
In the erstwhile Bombay Stock Exchange. And there used to be pillars here, each with an alphabet on them. And depending on what alphabet your company started with,
yes,
you sort of stood around and did manual trading.
To be called as the ring.
Thanks a lot to BSC for giving us this opportunity, which is an inspirational place in itself. Amit today will talk to us about how brands can engage with the new age or the Tinder generation. Need I say more? And so, I'll just leave it to you.
Little bit difference between new age and Tinder generation.
Okay.
And Tinder generation is a generation which is everything for them is quick. Everything is what they want is uncluttered. So if you look at a Tinder screen, it's generally one picture, one image. Either it is a yes or a no, but there is no option key like a nota, like I don't want to take anything, because you have to actually take a call. And very interesting, we spoke about loyalty, and this is how I looked at loyalty. So for me, loyalty is like mercury. When a brand is hot, the mercury is up, the loyalty is up. When the brand is cold, not doing anything, it is down, or it might even burst. So if you look at anybody on Tinder today, everybody wants to look their best, everybody wants to give out the most coolest possible thing. And that is what is hotness all about. We are into business of, definitely what I call it, I'm into business of happiness. So the whole purpose of our brand, whole purpose of our company is to only make you happy. So how do you make you happy? So it might be through smell, or it might be through good hair or good skin. So this generation, because of he also spoke about the Nightingale gentleman here. Piyush spoke about how new issues, new problems are coming up. So India is the fastest balding country. People are losing hair, and who are these people? They are not of my age. They are the people who are the young generation. Habits. You spoke about McDonald's coming more, eating more. So you eat more refined food, you eat more junk food. You are going to lose hair. Now, what happens is somebody gets out of a college, starts working, starts making some money. Then they get into this scene where they want to actually hook up. So Tinder is all about hooking up. It's not even about dating. And that's where the journey starts. And they want to look nice. They want to have hair like Rameet so that he can do something like this, like Shah Rukh Khan. So yeah, so that's what happens. And that's the time when they actually start realizing, boss, मेरे को कोई स्वाइप नहीं कर रहा है राइट में. यस, सो व्हेन द गाइज स्टार्ट रियलाइजिंग कि मेरे को स्वाइप नहीं मिल रहा है राइट में, मुझे लिंक नहीं हो रहा है, दैट्स द टाइम दे स्टार्ट सर्चिंग कि बॉस, इज देयर अ प्रोडक्ट व्हिच कैन गेट मी अ हेयर ग्रोथ, इज देयर अ प्रोडक्ट व्हिच विल मेक श्योर दैट माय हेयर लुक्स नाइस, एंड दैट्स वेयर दे कम टू Soulflower. So the whole journey, when we look at people who come through the Tinder age, are the people who are looking for a solution, right solution, and at that moment they don't want to wait for a long time. They want to see, will you deliver or not. Their question, simple question is, boss, ये चीज़ चलेगी या नहीं चलेगी, चलेगी तो मैं खरीदूंगा, नहीं चलेगी तो मुझे इंटरेस्ट नहीं है. And this is how the whole journey evolves, and the consumer keeps on coming, going. There are some consumer, as Ajay said, they return back. Some consumer might use your product, be happy, they might move out, they might not need me again. But this is how the whole journey of Tinder age is happening today.
Wonderful. I'm sure there's questions.
I'm always interested.
He has to ask me.
Yes.
He has to ask me. And he should ask me because it's important. He's like my guru. I've learned from him. So.
No. Well, now you're embarrassing me. But no, the question, which is a genuine one, is how do you track customer lifetime value when people are in problem solution mode? I had a problem, you fixed the problem, now I'm done, I don't care about you anymore. How do you make long-term value out of that?
Okay, so it's a big challenge, and we have always been seeing this as a challenge, and what we do and how we go back to people. So there is something which so I'll come back to the Tinder thing. So when people start on Tinder, they look for hookup, then they go to something called as Hinge, where they look for dating, and they might then go on Shadi.com, where they want to get married. Now the interesting part is, from Tinder to Hinge they want to go, there is something called as maintenance. They still want to maintain, they still want to be desirable. Only after getting married they might put on weight, or they might have some challenges. That's a different thing. So for us, the lifetime value starts from the Tinder age, and till the Hinge they are there, we are there. We are trying to figure out. And again, then people get married, and this is, I'm telling you exactly how it happens. People get married, they put on weight, they go wrong, whatever it might be. Then again, when they are hitting their 40s, they want to look nice, they want to look good. So if I look at a lifetime value, there are some gaps, and people use certain products initially, let's say for a hair growth, then they go on a hair maintenance, and what we try to do is to bring in our aroma products to their lives, because that is where the indulgence comes. So they start with the hair care products, but ultimately when they are buying their own homes, their houses, they're getting into a house, that's where Soulflower actually comes in. And we have a plethora of products to be offered. It might not be only the indulgence, in terms of in the home, but also indulgence with your skin. So if I have to actually define Soulflower is your ex-friend, which gives you pleasure in your me time. It is very clear. Today's the time is of self-love, self-indulgence. That's what Soulflower is always doing about.
Very fascinating. Let me tell you an interesting story, which is maybe 25 years old.
Okay.
One of my first jobs, and I won't name the brand, but it was a brand that offered slimming services. You could become thinner with them.
Okay.
Or so they claim.
Please let me
become
know
thinner
also.
with them.
Please let me know also.
And one day they called me in, and the proprietor called me in, and he said, I want you to make a discount coupon which is valid for 6 months. I said, okay, so if you buy the service today, in 6 months you can take a discount. So I was curious. I said, why 6 months? And he said, I want you to target this at the Punjabis. I said, okay, why 6 months? Why not 3 months? Why not 1 year? What is a 6 months? He said, I have figured out from my personal experience that everybody loses weight 3 months before they get married, because they need to get married.
Yes.
And everybody puts on weight in their first 3 months of marriage, and then needs to lose it again.
Yes.
So there is a 6-month window in which I want them to come back. And it's such
So
a
that's
fascinating
good
story that
insight.
25 years later we are sitting and talking
That's a
about
good
it.
insight.
Yes.
I'll definitely go back and use it.
So on that note, Thank you so much. That was
Thanks.
most fascinating. No,
Thanks a
you're
lot.
supposed
Oh,
to sit
sorry,
down and
sorry,
shake my
sorry.
hand.
Thanks a
Let
lot.
me
Thanks a
speak.
lot.
Thank you. I'd now like to invite my next guest, Rajiv Bansal, to represent the news view from our business, from the point of view of the work we do now. Talk to us a little bit about consumer-driven strategy, strategy that revolves around affinity and around reward.
This is a very appropriate topic for us because we are a consumer business in news. And so what I'll try to do is I'll try to take our strategy and sort of break it down into how it maps to our goals in consumers. First place to start is sort of purpose of an organization. I think we've all talked about it a little bit. So when we think about purpose in news, there are two purposes really, right? One is we have a purpose of social responsibility. I'll not go into it too much. The second is we made a choice to be a profitable business. So we believe in being capitalist, unabashedly so, and we don't plan to go the Guardian way and ask people for donations. We don't plan to bemoan the fact that we can't make money. So it really comes down to how do we make money. And so when we look at any consumer internet business, money is really made through revenue equations. So we looked at our revenue equation. We said, okay, what does our revenue equation for, let's say, ad revenue look like? So it looks like monthly active users times sessions we get in a month, times screens people consume in a session, times ad content ratio, and times your CPM. So that's your revenue equation for a standard ad-driven consumer internet business. And when you look at all of these aspects, right, there's some which are direct sales driven or your programmatic stack driven, which are CPMs. There's ad content ratio, which is user experience driven. There's acquisition, which is your MAU. And then the big fat part of it is consumer engagement. So we figured out pretty quickly that we are going to be all about consumer affinity and consumer engagement. So then our strategy became all about how do we go and build consumer engagement. And so we, by the way, have always very openly talked about our strategy because, you know, if you're better at executing our strategy based on our strengths and weaknesses, all the power to you and shame on us. So I'm going to talk about how our strategic pillars sort of align to this, right? So the first strategic pillar was personalization audiences. So we fundamentally believed that our newsrooms produce more than 1,000 pieces of content every day. In order to get somebody to engage with one piece of content on a mobile phone screen, we need to take up the entire mobile phone screen. So in order to maximize your engagement in content, we needed to order the pieces of content properly. And everybody wanted a different ordering. And so we said, great, that means we have to actually build personalization, we have to build audiences. The second thing is we try to figure out where are audiences going and growing. And that led us to, okay, if you look at the Indian landscape, almost all of the growth is in local languages. So English is growing at about 1% because all the people who are English speakers, like all of us, already have smartphones. But it is vernacular audiences where you're seeing almost an exponential growth. And so we started launching local languages. So as we were looking deeply into this, we realized that the way our consumers are organized in how they consume information, a lot of them actually are not literate. So it's not only the fact that geo is exploding and data is becoming cheap. It's because we define literacy in this country as if you can read and write, you're supposed to be literate. Now that doesn't mean you can consume an entire newspaper article. So that's where we came up with alternative formats, and that's where video became our third pillar. And then when we put all of our different funnels together, we realized there's no way for us to go and become a global media powerhouse and actually go and explode our revenues unless we were to go and charge people for content. So that's how we came up with our fourth pillar, which is subscription. So those four pillars were all driven around how do people engage with us, where the communities are, how do the people consume content from us, and how do they want to pay us, and and how do we make money. So that sort of is our entire strategy, completely driven on consumers.
Fantastic. If there's one question, we can take it. Yeah.
Distribution, you spoke about vernacular language. How do you really decode any of this news which is happening? Let's say if there is a news about climate change and a person sitting in, let's say, Ahmednagar speaks and understands Marathi. How does person really understand what is climate change all about? Because I see a lot of challenge. I read Marathi, I read Hindi, I read English. I see a lot of challenge. People talk about a lot of news and what are the statements of the political leaders, but they really don't talk about that subject most of the times. So how do you really can decode something like this on a YouTube or on your channel and people can consume it? That's my question to you.
Sure. So that's a great question. So when you think about climate change for somebody sitting in Ahmednagar and who is not conversant with English, so the first answer to your question is today that person has no access to that information. If that because there's maybe not as much deep information in Marathi, right, which is the language this person understands. So when we go back to our strategic pillars, we actually came to the same insight. We said there are people sitting in Ahmednagar who actually do want to know about climate change, and we do have these products in other languages such as English, where we actually have lots of relevant content. And this actually had, when we started translating this down into actual operations, this meant we had to look at our newsroom in an entirely different way. So we have our websites based on our Hindi newspaper. We have our websites based on our English newspaper. We have, which are both general purpose newspapers. We have business in Mint, and then we also have a Desi Martini, which is more entertainment. And so as we were looking at this and solving this problem, where we need to now take and create energy so that we can actually get content which might exist in our English newspaper and now bring it back to this audience in Marathi. What we realize is we need to relentlessly verticalize. So what we've been doing over the last 1 year in particular, since our chief editor joined from NDTV, is we've actually been going and saying, look, sports is sports. It doesn't matter what language it is, right? So we want to make sports content now go across Hindi and English and all of our regional languages. Business is business. Now there can be clear articulation of brand between what the Mint audience is versus what the Hindustan Times audience is versus what the Hindi Hindustan audience is. But business is business, so we are verticalizing that. And as we've done that, we've been able to get to the right verticals so that we can actually take that vertical and go across our languages. So it really came down to operations. And Marathi is one of those languages which is on our early roadmap of languages. So that is content that, as a result of sort of operationalizing ourselves according to our strategic pillars, we've been able to sort of get to.
On that note, I have to close the episode. So I'm going to sum up some of our thoughts. But thank you. That's a great way to end the episode. Clearly, as everybody today is sort of emphasized and re-emphasized, brands that aspire to create a connection, or brands that have purpose, brands that are seeking to solve real problems, brands that are authentic, are naturally engaging brands. I think that contrary to the belief that just getting customers, and there is lots of stuff around getting customers these days, the wheel's taking its circle again, and we're heading back to a time where lots of marketing action is going to happen around affinity, around loyalty, and the rewards that all of that brings with it, right? On that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on episode number 9 of Brand Studio Live, co-hosted by the HD Brand Studio and DMA Asia. Special thanks to our friends from DMA Asia and to Bansal for powering this wonderful event. A big round of applause for the Brandmasters today. Thank you. Big thank you to Fever FM because they help us evangelize this program. A very big thank you to BSC for helping us host this event. Privileged to be sitting here today in what used to be a trading hall, inspired. Thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to you coming back and joining us for another episode with an all-new set of Brand Masters. More details coming soon. Thank you.